My name is Francisca Oboh-Ikuenobe. I go by Franca. My title is full professor of geology and biological science at the Missouri University of Science and Technology. Right now, I also have an administrative role as associate dean for academic affairs in our College of Engineering and Computing. Growing up in Nigeria, I did not really see fossils because I wasn't near a river or in the ocean or somewhere. I was right in the middle of the country, in the rainforest, to be very precise. But then when I went to the university, I developed interest in paleontology. In my final year, I had to do an honors thesis and accidentally stumbled on paleontology as a project. So that was where it all started for me. My work as an academic involves teaching, research, and service. I teach courses in sedimentary geology, any paleontology courses on my campus. They come through me. But then there's the research enterprise. And so I conduct research in mostly palynology, which is the study of organic world microfossils like spores and pollen and phytoplankton in the ocean and in lakes. So with my research, I collaborate with other scientists, microbiologists, geologists, and using their expertise to understand how the earth has evolved, the age of the sediments I'm studying, the paleo environment and paleoclimate, because pollen is very, very sensitive to climate change. And even as far as how the sea level has changed with time. And then there's the service part where I'm quite active in my professional societies and have been president of the Palynological Society. And I also take my work outside the university, like to the community, so doing outreach. So my job is not boring, I can assure you. The surprising fact about my career is that that first project I mentioned as an undergrad was suggested to me by my department chair because he felt I hated field work. And the reason he felt that way was because whenever we had field trips, I had malaria. I came down with malaria. So he thought I was faking it. Okay, so he said to me, why don't you do palynology? You'll be on the microscope most of the time. You don't have to go out to the field, right? And you're always sick when you go out. And I really didn't know. And then he added another caveat. Palynology is a new field. So you have a chance to make your name, to make a mark. Okay, so compared to most aspects of paleontology, like dinosaurs, like studying clamps, the study of spores and pollen is relatively young, maybe 100, 200 years younger, but it's been around for over 100 years. So that was his thinking. And I went into palynology, but then I knew I still wanted to go out to the field. So what I've done with my career is to also do that same sedimentology. So I study the rocks themselves. And even when you're looking for the fossils, you have to know what kind of rocks they came from. So that I made that part of my research. So with that context, I have done lots of field work. So the idea of staying in the lab just did not sit well with me, and my career hasn't taken that path. But you still need a microscope to look at those tiny pollen and things like that. As an academic, one of the aspects I've loved is that opportunity to travel. But to travel, you need money, right? So it means you have to have your research grants. And I've been lucky enough to have brought in enough money to allow me to do my work. So some of the neatest areas I've gone that have really resonated with me, 3 places: South Africa, Egypt, and Australia. So my first trip to South Africa was on an exchange program between the University of Missouri system and the University of the Western Cape in Cape Town. And I went to South Africa to teach for 2 weeks and then to explore opportunities for research and field work for another 2 weeks. And flying into Cape Town, I think did something to me. I've been back 5 or 6 times since then, and each time I go back to South Africa, it's like I learned something new. So you are learning not just about the rocks, you are learning about the people and their culture. So I still have friends I made from my first trip. It's going to 28 years now. And then Egypt. I've been to Egypt twice. My first time was a National Science Foundation grant that took me there to do field work. And I was privileged to take 2 young undergraduates, females, with me. And we were based in Alexandria. Alexandria, right on the Mediterranean coast, is one of the most beautiful places. It's even much more beautiful than Cairo. But we were actually studying the Western desert. We were out in the desert doing field work. And obviously you don't go to Egypt without going to the pyramids, So I went back 3 years later as a Fulbright scholar. I took my family with me. They were able to spend their spring break with me in Egypt. Like my daughter said to me, Mom, I know as a professor, you probably don't make much money, but thank you for taking us on travels, so, yeah, so Egypt. But I mentioned Australia. That was one that also resonated with me because we went to Australia to do research. And when we left, this was the first time the twin rovers went to Mars, 2004. We were busy looking for money at the time. So in 2005, we got funded. And our job was to look at the lakes, the salt lakes in Australia as analogs for Mars. That was Australia. So unless you look very carefully, then you may see trees in the background. You would think you're on a Martian. So going to Australia, we went to Victoria, we went to Western Australia. So, but in the end, we went back 3 or 4 years later to drill in the salt lakes. By the time we went back, the lakes were dry. And so we were able to drive a rig down to drill, and we drilled 60 meters and we found coal at the bottom of the core. So which meant 50 million years ago, Australia was like a rainforest. That part of us, yeah. So we had coal, just like what you would have in South Carolina today with this peat swamp. That's what was there. But so today is all like a desert. So that job was the research was to understand how acidity, the lakes are acidic, how they formed salt. You'll be walking on salt on these lakes. When did that start? And of course, the climate, so we actually published the work on the pollen last year. So those 3 areas were, the ones that really resonated with me: Egypt, South Africa, and Australia. And it's through my work. So both teaching and research.
What is your favorite thing about being a paleontologist?
I think it's that curiosity of trying to tease out the unknown. Because most times we are starting out with not even knowing what you're looking at. And so I get that thrill doing the research, trying to put names to this pollen that looks weird or looks like this other pollen, but what's the difference? Are they the same? So it's that curiosity and the fact that they're still where they are, why are they preserved? It's even like the dinosaur, for example. Why is that dinosaur bone this way? Or how did it get buried where it is? So trying to go back in time and infer what happened, that's a thrill for me. So I really love that. And besides, not just palynology, most fossils are cool. I always tell students fossils are cool.
What is the hardest thing about being a scientist?
The hardest thing is being a female in a male-dominated field. And then for me, it's it was triple or quadruple whammy when I came. Okay, so you show up as female and then you are Black, foreign with an accent. So those were the four things I used to hear from students. Oh, we can't hear you. We don't understand your English. It's like, excuse me, my English is Queen's English. Because then when I came here, I spoke more British accent, but it's always interesting because you would hear this from most women where most times people don't even listen to you. They just, even when you are trying to contribute, it's like, what do you know? You're a woman. Or they just dismiss you. That's the hardest thing. Gender. I think for me, people ask me first if it's race. I tell them no, because I don't look at race. I don't ignore it, but I don't dwell on it. I have experienced racism, but it doesn't define me. So gender is, for me, I mean, they see a Black person first, but you're still a woman. And whether you're a white woman or a Black woman or Asian, we all experience gender discrimination. But that's been one of the most difficult. So it's almost like I have to work extra hard, harder than my male colleagues, to be, not that I don't care what people think about me, but it can bother you sometimes.
What advice would you give to anyone who wants to be a paleontologist, or particularly young girls who might want to be paleontologists?
It's like, be yourself, be resilient, because that's something I've learned, that resilience. If you love paleontology, pursue it, and pursue it in such a way that you do not limit your skill set. You may want to be about a paleontologist, but along the way, pick up some other skill sets that would even make you a more rounded person. And so that if those jobs in paleontology are few, you will still be employed because you have this other skill set and you'll be able to use, your experience. And then always ask questions because curiosity is very, very important, and be ready to adapt in any situation. Just be ready to do field work. I mean, you can't sit at home and dream about being a paleontologist. You have to be ready to get dirty. And while you're out there, to learn, like respect yourself and others, learn to speak up. Speaking up doesn't mean that you are being disrespectful. So that's why I put respect, that you can speak up in a respectful way. But if people know that you will speak up, and they are more careful what they say around you. Your education, no one can take from you. Nobody, because you earned it. Nobody, Like I said, they may want to disrespect you because you're a woman or because you're Black, but it doesn't take away from the fact that you have that education. So that's, and that's a simple truth.